Hello and welcome to this video where we will set up a chatbot using ChatGPT. We will be using C# and we will actually create a Blazor server app. So let's just dive right into it. I will open a new project inside Visual Studio 2022. So we will say create a new project. We then want to choose Blazor server app and say next. And let's call this for chatbot app. Let's go and say next. In this case, we're going to use the .NET 7 framework. And that's actually everything, so we will just say create. So now that our project is set up, I want to go to pages, and then we want to open the index file, because I just think we will go and get rid of everything in here except the page title, and we could actually go and name that for chatbot. So one thing we need to know when we connect to the ChatGPT is that right now at this moment we only have the DaVinci 003 API that we can connect to, and that's the closest that we come to the actual ChatGPT. But as you can see on their website, when you log in, you can see that you can join the ChatGPT 4 API waitlist, and when you see this video it might already be available, so you can just go and use that model instead. Hopefully it will be mostly the same way we connect to ChatGPT 4, but we will wait and see. So now we can just go back to the project, and it should be pretty simple actually to create this chatbot when we have a API that we can connect to that actually give us all the answers. And when we use Blazor, as we do now, inside our index.razor file, we can go and specify the HTML we want to use. And beneath we can also go and add the code that we're going to use. So there should actually not be any other pages that we actually should interact with. The whole chatbot could be made on the same page. And I should also point out that I have actually not created this chatbot before I started this video. So we will go and make some trial and error, but I'm pretty sure that in the end we will have a nice chatbot that we can communicate with. So first of all, let's go and create our code section. Then we can go and include our uninitialized async method. This is the method that is going to be run when we load the page. I also think we want to have some layout up here. So we could go ahead and create a div and also a class and say that this should be our container. And when we use Blazor, then Bootstrap is already set up, so we can just go and use the classes from Bootstrap. So the next thing we can do is to go and make another div inside. In this case, we want to create a class that we call row, and then I think maybe we could go and create a new div with a column of, let's say, 4. And I actually just want to keep this empty, but let's go and copy and paste it 2 times. And this one is going to be empty, and also this one, so that we just center like a container that we can use for the chat box, so that we actually want to work inside this middle column. And if you don't understand Bootstrap, then just hang on, because we will look at the page and I'll show you why we're going to do this. So now we have a container for the actual chat box where we're going to write to the chatbot, but maybe we should even go and divide this even further. So we could call this for messages. And then we could go and call another div to have a class of text message. So the idea here is that inside this message div, we are actually going to see all the messages, like, you know, from Messenger. If you have Facebook, then you write in Messenger. And actually just on smartphones, you have this area also if you still receive some SMS on your phones. And now I actually just found a picture, so it's like this, that we're going to set it up. And then the next thing we have is the container where we're going to put a input field and also a send button, so we can send the message to the chatbot. So just to be able to actually see the design of this, let's go and create a div template here with a class of response, and then just go and say Control D to duplicate this line, and then we want to say question. So these boxes should be when we send a question, so we can see what we actually sent ourselves. And then we also have the response from ChatGPT. And the reason I have them now is actually just to go and design these inside our CSS folder. So we can go to the www root folder, and inside the CSS folder we have our site.css, and let's just go and scroll down to the bottom. So now I just typed in our classes that we created. We have the messages, which was the whole area where we have the response and the questions inside. So I actually think we have to go to the index page again, because in here we will just go and type some random stuff. And I also did it to the questions, just so we have some template text that we can go and see. So let's go to the CSS again. And in here I actually want to specify a height on this. So we could try to say that the height should be 800 pixels. We could also go and make a border and make it 1 pixel solid black, just so we know where the area is. And then let's go and say that the width should be 100%. And then we want to look at the response. And I actually think we will just go and run the application now, because we can actually go and live update it with the CSS. So we don't have to close the application and open it again, but we can actually easier see when we change something inside our CSS file. So let's go and open the application. And now you can see we actually have this box now, which is centered inside the white area. And then we have our response text, and we also have our question text. So I will go and make this a lot more prettier than now. And that's why we're going to change the CSS. I actually also want to go and delete or just remove this menu over here, so that we have a whole clean page, and also this top menu here. So let's just go back, and inside our shared folder we have our main layout, and it's actually in here that we have the navigation menu, so we can just go and get rid of that. And as you can see, we also have a link here saying about, and that's actually the menu, or as you can see, the top row that we had on our page. So let's also remove this. And for this to work, we also have to go and say hot reload. So if we go back to the page now, we can see we just have a clean white page with only our chat box inside. But let's go back to the code and then go into our index.razor file. Or actually, we want to go to the CSS file, because we have to style the response and the question. So my idea is to have it like you saw on the picture, where we have the response on the left side and we have the questions on the right side. So back to the code, we can first of all say that we want to have a background color, and we could go and make it gray, but I think that is too dark, so maybe light gray. And if that's too dark, we will go and just make it a hex color instead. Then we want to say that it should have a width of, let's say, 80%, and then we also want to give it some padding, so that the text gets a little much more space. So let's say 20 pixels. And let's actually go and see how this looks now. And as you can see, it actually looks okay. We need to have some margin around the box also, so that it don't hit the edges of our message box. So let's go and create that margin, and also maybe 20 pixels. And let's see how it looks. So this is actually okay. I will also go and make some border radius and set it to 20 pixels again, and let's see how that is. And now you can see it actually takes form now. We might want to make this text a little bit smaller, and then let's go and make it white. So we want to say color white, and then the font size, let's set that to 13 pixels. And now you can see it actually look okay, but when we make the text white, it's a little bit more difficult to read. So maybe if we go and make it actually a little bit darker, this gray box, so maybe we should just go and say gray. And I actually think this looks pretty okay. So let's just go and copy and paste everything to our question. But in this case, we should maybe make it like a dark blue. Let's see if that is a good color. So it is maybe a little bit too dark. So I found this predefined color called Dutcher blue, and it's actually a pretty nice color. If we go and save it, you can go and see that it actually look okay now. We then want to have that the box is on the right side instead of the left side. So what we can go and do is to set a float and set it right. You have to be careful when you use floats, but I think in this case that it actually is okay. If we see the project now, we can see that we now have it in the right side just as we want to. So I think there is a little bit too much space between these two, so let's go and maybe say that the margin should be 10 pixels, and I can see it's actually the other one that should be 10 pixels, so 10 and 20. So now you can see it came a little bit closer, but we have to do the same with the gray box. So up in our margin, we say 10 pixels also. And when you do it like this, you specify that these 10 is the top and the bottom, and then this is the left and the right. So again, let's see how it looks. And well, it is a little bit better. Maybe we could set it to 5, and also this one. and then I think it's okay for now. So now we actually have a template for some text, and if we go and inspect this, then we can see that the box here is the message box, and then we also have a text message. So underneath this message box we want to add the input field where we can write something, and then also a button where we can send the message. So back in our application, we want to go to the index.razor file, and then inside our text message, and then I want to create a input field, and the value in this input field should bind to a variable that we're going to create, and let's just go and call it for message. So down in the code section, we can now go and create a public string with the name of message. So now whatever we type inside our input field will be bind to this message variable. And then the second thing we want is actually just a button. And when we click that, we want to execute a method. So let's go and say button. And we just want to say that it should send. So the text on the button will be sent. And then we want to say on click. And that should be equal to the method that we want to execute. So let's just call it for send message. And then we just want to go and create this method. So copy this name and insert it down here. And then we want to say that it should be a public. And I think we want to run this as a task. So it should also be async. And then let's close it off here. But I will actually go and create a new method already. So inside this send message, we just want to make the actual API call to ChatGPT, and I don't want to sit and write everything because I already created an article about this. I do also have a whole other video where I show how you connect to ChatGPT, but I will just run through the code so you understand it. And if we scroll down here, you can see that I actually have a public class here called ChatGPT, and this class will actually just connect to the text DaVinci 003 model. And as you might notice, this is actually just a console connected to ChatGPT with. So we actually need to do something with the code. So first of all, I just want to go and take everything inside the code here without taking the HTTP client. So let's just copy this, go to our app and insert it. We do now get some errors, but basically what is happening in here is that we have our API key. You want to go and get your own API key because every call you make costs a small amount of money. Then we go and set the default request header inside our HTTP call where we add authorization. And because this API key is going to be used as a bearer token, then we say bearer and we insert the API key. So that is going to be our authorization when we send the request to OpenAI's API. We then have some JSON content where we're going to say we have a prompt, and this is actually going to be the text. So we can already go and say that this should be the message variable because that was the one we created up here, and it's just bind to the input field. So whatever is going inside the input field will be in the variable called message. And this will of course only be executed when we click the button. We say send message. So this one is going to be run. But in our case, we're going to connect to the model called text DaVinci 003. This is still the best model right now to connect to. And as I showed you earlier, we will soon be able to connect to ChatGPT 4 version. So go in and see if that is the case now, that we can actually connect to it, because then I will hope and only think that you have to edit this model so that it fit the ChatGPT 4. So we also have to specify how many tokens we want to throw at this request, and the tokens depend on what model you're connected to. So it's a little bit hard to calculate, but the maximum token you can send is 4,000. But you also have to know that when you get the response back, then it also counts as tokens. So you should not really send a huge message to it, because then it's not able to send so much back and you actually don't get the response then. But the response context is going to be created out of the HTTP call where we say post async, and we want to go and target the api.openai.com/v1/completions, and then we want to send our JSON string with the request. So as you can see now, we have a lot of red underlines, and that's because we actually need to include newtonsoft.json, but we will do that in just a moment. So when we do this, we set the post async on our HTTP call, we can go and say that the response context down here is going to fetch the content that we got back from the request, and then we say read as string async. So this will actually give the response back, where we can go and deserialize this object, just say dynamic, because then inside the data we can go and target the choices where the index is 0. And this is the way that we're actually going to get the text from the request. So you don't have to think so much about it. That is just the way you have to do it, because that is how the response is built that we receive after the API call. But now let's go and get rid of these red lines. So first of all, let's just close the application, because we want to right click the project and say manage NuGet packages, go to browse, and then go and write newtonsoft.json. So we want to install this one, and it's actually just the newest version, so just go and install that. And when that is installed, we can go back to the front page or our index.razor page, and then just hover over this JSON convert, and as you can see, it will then say show potential fixes. If it doesn't do that, just hit Alt Enter, and now you can see it recommend that we use the newtonsoft.json library that we just installed. And as you can see down here, we're actually going to return this, because this came from the code that we just copy and pasted. So in that case, it was just in a method for itself that returned the string. So I don't think we have to do that in here, because what we will do is just to go to make a list where we push this inside, so that we can go and display it up here as a list. So we also have to include this HTTP. So to actually get this, I actually think we can just go and use the private static method here called HTTP client, and it's already called HTTP, and creating a new instance of the HTTP client. So let's go and copy this and paste it just beneath the message here, and we can see the error messages is gone. It doesn't mean that it works right now, but we will go and test it in just a moment. So we also need to have an API key. So if we go into OpenAI's website, so let's go to OpenAI, under the developer here, we can say API references, and then you could see up in the corner if you're logged in. If you're not logged in, then create a user. In my case, I am logged in, so I can click it and say view API keys. And as you can see, I already have a bunch of API keys. So in here, I can just say create new secret key. So you can actually see I have already the maximum API keys. So I'll just go and delete one of them, say revoke key, and then create a new one. So we will go and copy this and put it inside the API key. And in this case, it doesn't really matter that you see this, because I'll just go and delete it again once I stop this video. But let's go and test this, and we can actually go and test it in a simple way, because we can just go and say inside our empty column here that we will have a paragraph, and let's go and say that we have a variable called testing. So down here at the message, we just want to go and say Control D to duplicate the line, take the testing and create this variable, so that down here we can actually just go and say testing should be equal to whatever we get. So let's go and see if we get any errors, and we do actually get an error. So let's see what that is, and it's because we need some encoding over here. So if we just scroll out a bit here, we can then go and hover over this encoding, say Alt Enter, and use the system.txt. So now that error should be gone. So let's go and test it again. And now you can see we have the messages. So let's go and say hello and say send. And then you can see that the model actually came up with a response here. So it takes a little while. I think it maybe took around 3 seconds or something. Then this answer came. So what we want to do now is actually just to include it into the layout that we have. So let's go back. So my idea here is that we know that when we send a question or we send a text to ChatGPT, then we will get a response. So it will always be, back and forth messaging. You should not be able to send 2 messages after each other, because what should it then answer for? So it's not like, texting a friend or something that you maybe send 3 messages and then your friend answer and he sent 2 messages, because it is a chatbot. So it is really 1 message and 1 message. So my idea is to make a for loop. And actually before that, we need to create a list of strings. So let's go and say public, and then say this should be a list and it should be strings. And let's call this for messages, and say that we have a new list of strings. And then we actually want to start that you sent the first message because you want to tell it something. So we say messages, and it's inside the send message, because when we click on the send message button, then we want to add our message to this messages list. So we could say add, and then we want to add the message that we sent. And then we go and copy this, because at the bottom, we don't want to display this anymore, because we can just go and say that the results should go directly into our messages list. So by doing this, we can now take the messages list and go and for each it and go and make a for loop on it. And the reason I want to make a for loop and not a for each is because I actually want to have the index, because we know that if it is a index of 0 or actually just a even number, then it is me that have sent the question, and when it's an odd index that we hit, then it will be the response from ChatGPT. So this is the code that we want to use. We want to say that we start with a integer that is called I, that will start at the index of 0, and then we want to say that it should only continue if I is less than the length of the messages list, and then go and increase it by 1 when the for loop has run. And to check if something is even or odd, we can go and use the modulus. So we actually want to say if I modulus 2 is equal to 0, then it is actually the question that we sent. So let's go and take this template that we create and put it inside this if statement and get rid of all the text, because then we want to say that inside this message, or actually it is the messages, then we want to target the index of I, because we know that this is the message that we sent. And then we can just say else, then it must be the response from ChatGPT. So also go and remove this and say that this is the message from ChatGPT. So let's go and test this. Let's just close the application and open it again. So now everything is blank, just as we expect. So again, I want to say hello and send this. You can see we have the message now, but we actually get a exception. So there is actually something wrong with the code. So I did find out that we have to do some extra things here. We need to set this to string, because else we cannot insert it into our messages, because this is strings that we're going to handle. And then we also have to set this state has changed, because else we cannot update the view. This is basically just telling Blazor that the UI should be updated. So let's go and test it again, and we will say hello. And now you can see we actually get the response, but the box is not as we want it to be. So we will also just go and take a look at that. And I actually think if we send this again, we will actually get an error. And that's because it right now cannot handle 2 requests. So we also have to go and do so we can actually continue the conversation. So back in the code, I want to go to the CSS, because I maybe do think that we have to display these as block. So what I did to fix it was actually just to adding the float left to this response, because now you can see we have them aligned just as we want to have them. But as you can see, we now get it right, but if we click again, we still get this error. So we also have to fix that. And I believe that inside our code in the index.razor file, that it is because we need to set this HTTP to a new client every time. So let's go and say new HTTP client. So every time we make a new request, we are not going to reuse the HTTP. We're just going to create a new HTTP client. And let's go and close the application and open it to see if this is now working. So we say hello and send it. And now we can see we actually get the answer. So let's try again. And you can see it says hello again. And if we just try again and again, it actually just say exactly what we wanted to say. So let's just try to refresh this page and then say, what is the capital of France, and say send. And you can see it just gave us the answer. But I think we could go and make this a little bit more prettier. Maybe remove this border and just go and make it a background, and also just style this so it looks a little bit more prettier. So let's go to the code, and inside our CSS file, then we have the message here. We're just going to remove this border, and let's say that we want to have a background color, which should be a very light gray, and this is not light enough, I think. So maybe EEE. And now you can see we have this nice color. So let's go and also make some border radius to this. Just go and copy and paste it from the other class. And also make some padding. So now I actually think it looks pretty nice. You can always go and make it look much better, but for such a short project, I think that it's okay. So let's go and make this a little bit prettier. So in the index.razor file, we can actually just go and say we want to target this class called text message and include it in our CSS folder. And then say that we want to target the input field and also that we want to target the button inside this class. So first of all, I want to go and make it a width of 100%. Also create some padding, maybe just 10 pixels. And the button, I also think we want to have a width of 100% and also 10 in padding. And on the button, make a color of white and a background color, which should actually just be the same as this one. So we use the Dodger blue, and now you can see it actually starts to look a little bit better. We can then go and remove the border also. So just say none. And then I actually also want to make some border radius. But in this case, we want to make it so that it's cornered up here and not here, but down at the bottom also, so it looks like it's just one big box. So the way you do it for the bottom is just to say that the first two should be 0. This is the left top corner, the right top corner, and then the two bottom corners. So if we go back now, you can see that it has these border radius. We then want to remove it from the gray box here. So in that case, just go and copy and paste this, and we will just do it the opposite way. So take these two zeros and put them on the other side. And that was actually the box up here. It actually looks pretty good, but it was not what I was intended to do. So let's just go and put the border radius on the message instead. And let's also set it on this response box. So I do think that this actually looks pretty good. We can even go and just delete this one here and this one here. So let's actually try to do that. So for the response, we do still want to have 20 pixels at the right bottom side. So as you can see here, it will now put the 20 pixel in border radius, and then we just have to do it on the other side for the question. Now I think it actually looks pretty good. I also want to make the box fit the messages, and we also need to remove this border at the place where we write the question or whatever we want to send. So to remove the border from the text message input field, we just say border none, and then also remove it when there is focus on the box. So you say outline should be none, and this border color, we can actually just get rid of it. And then I think we want to use the same gray color from the response and put it on our input box. So let's go and see how it looks. And I actually don't like this color, so let's try maybe a light gray instead. And I do think it was a little bit better, maybe some more padding. So 20 pixels in padding, and I think now it should be okay. But we still want to fit the messages that is already created, so we want to have this to be a minimum height and a maximum height. So again, inside our messages here, you can see we have a height of 800 pixels. That should be just the max height. And then I think the minimum height, when we have no messages inside, it should be maybe 200 pixels. So we say minimum height. And then it should adjust as we put messages inside the box. So let's try to see if that works. So right now we have these messages, but let's just clean it all up. So we can see here, hello and send. And it actually sent a pretty long message back. Now I will just say hello. And as you can see, there is something wrong with the background here, but we are going down, so that's good. So I think this has something to do with that these are just floating objects, and that's why you should be careful with floating objects. So if we just go and make it maybe a fixed size instead, so let's say 500 and 500. So this would actually just be height of 500. Then we can see it actually still is going over the size, and that's because we have not a overflow that is saying scroll. So let's go and make a overflow on this, and it should be on the Y axis. So we can say scroll. And now you can see we can scroll in all the messages that is going to be sent. But I think that is actually all there is to create this chatbot. You really have to take care of how much you send and also how much you receive. So you might want to go and create a exception for this that can go and handle it. Sometimes the answer is also taking a little bit of time to come, so you could maybe go and include a loading icon. But I think this is basically how you go and create a chatbot, like the bare bone of what you should do or what you can do with C# and Blazor. So go and have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.